Hello. It's doing something different today. I'm going to combine the 19th and the 20th lessons of Pentecost with a couple of stories from Job and finish with a couple of stories of Job next week. And I think Job is a wonderful book that needs to be addressed. And, well, I'll share with you why. So, today, it'll be Job chapter 1, verse 1, and then it skips to the second chapter for 10 verses. And then there's another portion from Job chapter 23. The entire book of Job is 42 chapters. And it provides, I think, an important counterbalance to a whole lot of stories in Scripture. So, let's start with Job chapter 1, the opening line. There once was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. Now, what does that sound like? It sounds like a fairy tale, once upon a time. The land of Uz is no place. It's a made-up place. So there once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Now, several verses are skipped, and what happens is the scenario is God is walking around in heaven, and some of God's minions are there, one of whose name is Satan. Now, in this story, we commonly think of Satan as the name for the devil. It's Satan's name. But in this story, if you look at the original language, it's written in Hebrew, it says Ha-Satan, the Satan. So Satan is a name that means adversary or accuser. So the accuser, the adversary, the devil's advocate maybe. It's a title, it's not a name. But in order to create this fairy tale to make sense, well, Satan is the one who argues with God about Satan. So they have a bet. God points out to Job and says to Satan, "Isn't he a wonderful, upstanding, and righteous man?" And Job is very wealthy. He owns a lot of stuff. Cattle, beautiful home. He has several children, a wife, and Job truly is a righteous man from beginning to end of the story. And Satan says, well, he is richly blessed, but you take away all those blessings, he'll curse you. God says, no, he won't. And like a couple of schoolboys on a playground, remember this is a fairy tale, they make this bet. God bets Job will keep his upstanding character, his righteousness, will not curse God, even though he loses all of his many blessings, including his children. So Job suffers this devastating loss because God takes Satan up on this bet just to test to see if Job will curse God and turn away from God because he's lost all of his blessings. Well, this is a counterbalance to things like, last week I had the call to worship based on Psalm 1, which in essence says that the righteous will be blessed, the wicked will suffer. So this is a fairy tale to test that thesis, that understanding. And so God says, go ahead, take away all of his stuff. So now we continue in chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. One day the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, Ha-Satan, the Satan, also came among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Well, that reason was to make a bet to see if Job would keep his righteousness and his integrity. Then Satan answered the Lord, skin for skin. All that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. So in other words, Satan is doubling down on the bet. He said, yep, he's lost all his stuff. He's lost all his wealth. Even his children were killed. It's a terrible, devastating loss. And now Satan is upping the bet. Yeah, well, if you make him sick to the point of death, then he will curse you. And continuing with verse 6, the Lord said to Satan, very well, he is in your power, only spare his life. So make him really sick, but just don't kill him. And I bet Job will keep his integrity. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. So there's poor Job with a broken piece of pottery, scraping the boils on his flesh. He's miserable. He's sitting in the dump, in the ashes. It's pathetic. So Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So, here's Job, lost everything. Now he's really sick to the point of death. And his wife comes up to him and tempts him to curse God because she thinks he's become so bitter and useless in life that he's not good to anyone, including himself. Curse God and die. Now that would be a very heavy temptation coming from Job's wife. And she speaks as any foolish woman would speak, Job says. So keep in mind, Job's wife has also suffered grievous, devastating losses. Wealth, home, children. If you've been around parents who've lost children, it is very devastating, and it's hard to know what to say and what to do. So we move on to the 23rd chapter of Job. Now this is after Job has suffered these losses, and Job's Job's friends show up, and they see it's intervening before this 23rd chapter. Job has had this encounter with three of his friends. And shortly after Job has suffered these devastating losses, his wife has told Job, curse God and die, which would be a real temptation in a situation like that. If you've been in a situation like that, maybe you've thought the same thing. And if your spouse, the closest person on earth next to you, says something like that, you might take him up on it. Now when Job's three friends show up, they see Job sitting in the dirt, suffering, scraping his sores with a broken piece of pottery in the dump, in ashes. It's definitely symbolic grief, and according to the symbolic grief customs of the time, Job's three friends are so taken with Job's suffering that when they see him, they sit there with him for 7 days. 7 days of mourning. And after this proscribed 7 days of mourning, which is typical of the tradition of the time and place and culture, and they open up their mouth. And with friends like that, who needs enemies? And Job's friends try to convince Job, well, you must have done something wrong to deserve all of this. You must have sinned. They're thinking Psalm 1, the righteous are blessed, the wicked suffer, so Job must be wicked. What was this wickedness, this sin Job had committed to deserve all of this? Now, why would they do that? Why would Job's friends try to convince Job that he must have sinned in order to deserve his suffering? So let's read this portion, and I'll get back to that. He's answering his three friends after he's argued with them for 20 plus chapters, trying to convince them, you must have sinned. Job maintains his integrity. No, I didn't. Sort of like they're gaslighting him. It's kind of like that old joke where the wife comes home and finds her husband naked in bed with a woman. And he immediately tries to talk his wife out of the situation. It's not what you think, honey. And, goes through this long explanation trying to convince his wife that what she's seeing isn't really what she's seeing. And he ends by saying, are you going to believe what I say or your own lying eyes? And that's kind of what Job's friends are doing. They're gaslighting Job. Gaslighting, that based on that old movie where the husband is trying to convince his wife that what she knows to be real, what she perceives to be real, what she sees and hears is not real. So it's come into the context of our culture this day is gaslighting. You're trying to convince somebody that what they're actually seeing and what they believe is true, is not true. And so you're trying to make them crazy, think that they're crazy, because the reality that they see, which is true, is not true. So, the gaslighting friends of Job. Friends like that you don't need. So, chapter 23, verse 1 and following, Job is responding to his three friends. Then Job answered, today also my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy despite my groaning. God's hand is heavy despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, might find God, that I might come even into his dwelling. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Job wants to argue with God. I would learn what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, but he would give heed to me. There an upright person could reason with him, and I should be acquitted forever by my judge. So Job wants to bring God to court. If God is just, well, then God has to listen to his case because Job has a good case. He does not deserve his suffering, and Job wants to know why. So he's looking for God, and continuing in verse 8, if I go forward, he is not there, God is not there, or backward, I cannot perceive him. On the left he hides, and I cannot behold him. I turn to the right, but I cannot see him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. If only I could vanish in darkness, and thick darkness would cover my face. So Job is still considering the advice his wife gave him, curse God and die. Now he's talking again. He's considering seriously, just die. The ultimate way to numb oneself, die. So Job wants to sue God, take God to court. That's been done before. And he definitely wants to argue with God, bring his case before God. So remember, Satan, the superhuman adversary or accuser, Satan bets God that if every blessing that Job has is taken away from him, he will curse God. It's getting at the simple moral arithmetic that those who are righteous will be blessed and those who are cursed, or those who are wicked will be cursed. But we know in reality that sometimes the righteous suffer terribly and sometimes the wicked prosper enormously. Think of how many rich drug dealers do you know? Pablo Escobar was very rich and powerful. And somebody like Jesus, the most innocent man who ever lived, suffered terribly. So the story of Job, this fairy tale, addresses reality, doesn't it? Because reality is full of nuances. It's full of things we don't understand. It's extremely complex. And Job's fair weather friends come to provide blame. After a 7-day mourning period, they just argue with Job about he must have sinned. So why would Job's friends try to convince Job that he must have sinned in order to deserve his suffering? Well, probably, I think for sure, they don't feel safe. Because they try to be righteous. They subscribe to this simple moral arithmetic. And if somebody like Job, whom they know is righteous and upright and has integrity, can suffer so terribly, then all bets are off for them too. And they don't feel safe. So they have to make sense of the moral universe in order to be able to conduct themselves without feeling anxious. Job must have sinned. We got to make sense of the world somehow. And Job argues otherwise. And you look at, in the midst of this argument Job has with his three friends, Job chapter 13, verses 4 and 5. Job says this to his three friends in the midst of this heated argument. As for you, you whitewash with lies. All of you are worthless physicians. If you would only keep silent, that would be your wisdom. So, when we meet, say, parents who've lost a child, we might say something dumb. Oh, God took him home. He's in a better place. She's in a better place. You can have more children. Those are dumb things to say. As Job would say, it would be your wisdom to keep silent. So when we're in those situations around people who've suffered devastating losses and these false platitudes start coming to our lips, stop them. It's best to be silent. Best to say, I'm sorry, I don't know what to do, don't know what to say, but I'm here. Just being present sometimes is enough. How often do people bring those who have suffered losses a casserole dish so that they don't have to cook? It's a good thing to do. So who's right? Job or his friends? As Karl Marx says, religion is the opiate of the masses. Is that true? Does religion help us numb ourselves with false hopes? Or as Seneca says, religion is regarded by the common people as true, by the wise as false, and by rulers as useful. Still getting at what Marx says, religion is the opiate of the masses. But I like what Galileo said. Remember Galileo, one of the first Christian scientists who was declared by the Pope to be excommunicated for his thoughts of the earth really isn't the center of the universe? but at least we revolved around the sun. He was right about that, wasn't he? This is what Galileo said. I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use. In other words, use your head. God gave us this ability to think. Use it. I'm pretty sure Jesus meant the same thing with his disciples. Are you so dull? Is one of my parishioners' favorite verse when he's talking to his disciples. Are you so dull? You can't understand? He was always teaching, trying to help his disciples understand. Follow me. In the following, you'll figure things out. So now Job has lost, devastating losses. Can't understand why. His friends are trying to convince him he must have sinned. Job knows otherwise. He feels like he's losing his mind, I'm sure. And so he wants to take God to court. Or he tries to. But Job can't find God. So what will Job do? Will he take his wife's advice, curse God and die? Or will he persist in his integrity, keep his faith? What would you do? Haven't you been in Job's position? I know I have. I think all we have to do is live a while and we'll run into Job's position in life, even though it's a fairy tale from the land of Uz or the land of Oz. And that's what it sounds like, right? Remember Dorothy? In the land of Oz, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and then she gets knocked in the head when this tornado, this whirlwind shows up. Whirlwind. In the Bible, even in the story of Job, God speaks out of the whirlwind. The whirlwind, this powerful presence of chaos and disorder and destruction. It's a very real thing. And it is threatening. It can doom us. And sometimes it does. And how do we persist? How do we survive? How do we deal with this ferocious dragon in our lives? How do we keep the faith? And isn't that what the story of Dorothy is in the Wizard of Oz? How to find her way down the path in life, the yellow brick road. And in the end, she wakes up from this dream, from this fairy tale land, and she has figured something out. That she's had the ability to deal with this all along. The scarecrow, he's smarter than he thinks he is. The Tin Man has more heart than he thought he did. And the lion has more courage than he thought he did. When pressed under difficult circumstances, we find that we probably have more strength than we thought. Be bold and mighty forces will come to your aid. Isn't that what our principles of faith are trying to teach us? And that God is with us even when we think God is absent? So Job is wondering, should I take my wife's advice, curse God and die? Or will he persist in his integrity? What would you do? And we've all been in Job's position. What did you choose to do in that kind of a situation? What was the result? In that position, we can either choose to continue to hope in God, despite all evidence to the contrary, or we can choose despair, resentment, blaming, and bitterness, and just make it worse. So, this fairy tale turns out to be very real. It describes reality very well and the dilemmas in our practice of the faith that we all face. What will we do? Job sounds like Jesus quoting Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? So Job is a forerunner of the story of Jesus' own suffering, the one who tells us to take up our cross daily and follow. Describes reality pretty well, doesn't it? So we find out our faith is based on trust when we don't see any evidence to support our claim. Faith is not certainty, it's trust. Will we cling to our Lord in the valley of the shadow of death or not? Let's continue this story next week. Keep the faith. Be like Job. Don't curse God and die. His disciples, Jesus' disciples, thought it's worth it. I suppose we can believe that too. Trust. Amen.